Morning, everybody, and I'm Sean Fielding, Director of Innovation, Impact and Business at the University of Exeter and Chair of PraxisAuril, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the first PraxisAuril SHEDTalk, and so cool because we're bringing it to you from my innovation shed in my garden in sunny Torquay in the English Riviera. It's not often you can say sunny and Torquay in the same sentence for it to actually be sunny, but today it is definitely sunny. And as a result, you may hear the exciting bird calls from my garden, and I hope that will add to the atmospherics of the event. Our guest today won't need much introduction. Professor Trevor McMillan has been Vice-Chancellor of Keele University since 2015. He's spoken at PraxisAuril events on many occasions and led the McMillan Review into Knowledge Exchange, which was the latest in a long series of reports into just what was wrong with UK Knowledge Exchange. And he reported with the surprising view that, in fact, the UK was better than many other countries at Knowledge Exchange, but it was complex and poorly understood. And this endeared him to the Knowledge Exchange community hugely, as you can all imagine. And as a reward from government, he was given the task of steering the Knowledge Exchange framework into being and leading the working groups that drove all of that. The fruits of that work have been launched this year with the KEC data and narrative process and the KEC Concordat. So Trevor, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks very much, Sean. It's great to see you. And I must say, my shed's got all tins of paint on the shelves rather than books, so I'm pretty impressed.
I've cleared mine out. And then we also welcome Mark Bacon, who was previously Director of Research, Innovation and Engagement at Keele, and at the same time was Director of Strategy Development at the university, and for some of that time, Director of IT. It's the kind of local hero approach to management at Keele. Previously, he was head of the Keele University Science and Innovation Park, and for the past 9 months, he's been Chief Operating Officer at Keele, leading the whole professional services team. Mark, great to have you here. We are very sorry to hear of your recent family bereavement, so we're therefore doubly grateful for you for giving the time to spend time with us in our shed.
Thanks, Sean, and morning to you and to everybody else.
We also have Maxine Fakara as our facilitator this morning, and she's going to just explain the rules.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Hello, everyone. Great to have you all online. Yeah, just a few housekeeping things for Sean's shed talk today, and it's a very nice shed, as we all know. So we're using Zoom webinar because we've got quite a large group on the call today, and this is so that we can manage participants and keep everything looking smooth for you. To keep the bandwidth under control, participant video and sound is going to be disabled throughout. Of course, though, the whole point of this session is that you're asking questions of our guest speakers. So we are going to be using the Q&A function to log those. So I'm sure you're all expert Zoom users by now, but that Q&A function you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom screen, okay? I'll be keeping track of all your questions alongside Sean and the our exec team who are on the call behind the scenes. So please just send questions in as you think of them, whenever you think of them. You don't need to wait to be asked, but we will do our best to queue you up appropriately, and Sean will bring in questions at appropriate points, and we'll have a session towards the end of the call as well. Can you please remember to put your name and your organisation alongside your question, especially if your own Zoom account is a personal one. So we need to see where you're asking the question from, please. If you do have any difficulties with anything on the call, then you can contact the PraxisAuril meeting host via the chat function, which is a private chat function at the bottom of the screen also. But for now, yes, just keep thinking of those questions, use the Q&A function, and just to remind people as well that we're recording this session and it will be made available afterwards to our members. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you very much, Maxine, and thanks to Chris Baker, Tom Hockaday, Liz Frint and Phil Clare, who've all already started commenting on the chat. But just a reminder that any questions go in the Q&A part of the side. You can leave the comments to the chat. And just to reassure Tom, we're all okay. Thanks. So, Trevor, I wonder if I can start with you. You're the HEFCE Knowledge Exchange or Research England Knowledge Exchange Framework Champion. You led that report in 2016 on good practice. Surely you'd done enough at that point. Why did you think the Concordat was necessary? What were you trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think the key thing was that I think one of the major findings actually from that technology report, and not necessarily a finding, but an impression, was that actually university leadership wasn't necessarily getting to grips with the whole KE agenda. And we were all using the words, we all were doing lots of good stuff. But it was very much seen in many quarters as that third stream, third leg, whatever you wanted to call it. And apart from anything else, that was leading, I think, to a gap in the appreciation in government in particular, but in other parts of relevant society, not least the city in terms of finance and other areas. That lack of appreciation of just actually, how good the sector was comparatively to other parts of the world, but also how important it was. So I think certainly one of the follow-ons from that 2016 report had to be something that sent a message out from the sector to say, look, we really do take this seriously. We really are good at it. We're probably not as good as we should be, but then none of us are at most of what we do. So how do we set things in train that allow every institution to highlight what they're good at, but also get the message out that we collaborate, that we have a good idea of what good should look like, and that actually we're striving to make that happen in different ways. So that sort of, we started off with a sense of, I think we called it a leadership statement in the very first meetings. What should that be? And then the idea of a Concordat emerged, and many of you have heard me talk before. The model that was in my mind was the Concordat around early career researchers, which I think gave the sector a bit of a nudge to look after what in some cases had become a little bit of a lost tribe in some universities, and actually nudged us without too much pain, without too much blood. It took a little bit of time, but I think we think about that agenda much more now than we ever did before, and so that was a model that I thought could well work around knowledge exchange.
And it's called it's actually called a Concordat for the advancement of knowledge exchange in higher education. Is that deliberate?
Yeah, I think it is. I think because it's, I think two things. One is that the phrase, or one of the phrases that was picked up again from that 2016 report, picked up from government in various reports afterwards, was the lack of a one-size-fits-all. So, what it couldn't be was a blueprint for what knowledge exchange should look like in every university. On the other hand, what it could and should and hopefully will be is a framework in which whatever a university considers to be important within its own remit, and that will be influenced by its own portfolio, by its physical location, the regional context that it works with, or even the national context if their portfolio gives it that broader remit, that every university can then strive to be better. And I think that's the whole thing. I think it's the advancement bit, and also the indication that while the KEF is doing the metrics, that's sort of giving us an indication of what we've done. I think Alice Frost often uses the phrase that the Concordat is as much about how we do it as it is, what we do and what the outcomes are. And again, I think that's important.
Yeah. So, and you've set out as part of the Concordat these 8 principles which guide how we do it. Do you have a favourite?
No, I don't. If anything, I have a problem that actually, when I read one, it triggers a lot of the thinking of all the seven, and there's a lot of the overlap. I think a theme, though, that I think is important for me, actually is around supporting staff and students around all of this, because we've all got specialists who are interfacing specifically with particular parts of the outside world in what they do, whether that be into industry, smaller businesses, different elements of society. But certainly, as I say, with that sense of providing that leadership statement, something that gives that clarity internally and hopefully gives staff and students more opportunities in a supported way to do this. Because, you know, I'm not going to be doing any of this sitting in my office in our equivalent of the university house, or whatever you call it in your university. It's actually, how do we enable that environment within the university and hopefully therefore influence the sort of local and regional ecosystem that a lot of our activity will be played into, to actually do things better and move things along.
And what about university councils? So you set yourself a challenge of leadership in institutions. You might have been thinking about enlightened leaders like yourself, who understands some of this on the ground. Surely university councils would just be able to ignore this, won't they?
Potentially at one level, but actually, well, it'd be interesting to know what you all think, although we probably can't cope with 120 views this morning. But actually, certainly our council thinks a lot about our role in the region. They'll interpret it in different ways. You know, I suspect some councils will be much more focused on interactions with big industry, with how much money it's been bringing in. But I don't know about you, but I think the whole tone of university councils has changed in the last few years, not least because the demands from the Office for Students have demanded that they take interest in parts of the university activity that previously they were leaving to our academic senates or anything else. So I think the tone of councils has changed. And of course, if we get to the point, as I suspect we might, where the Concordat is something that we have to engage with in order to make ourselves eligible for high funding, then as soon as there's a pound sign in front of this conversation, then councils will inevitably take some more notice even.
Yeah, and particularly if it's not just high funding.
Indeed, and that, I think, inevitably is one of the challenges that we don't really know where that's going to work through. But I think, again, I've said publicly before that, you know, wouldn't it be great if it wasn't just the Research England bit of UKRI that takes notice of this? But now's not the time to discuss UKRI internal politics, I think.
Yes, well, there's the internal politics of the sector at the moment, isn't there, as a whole, which is quite intriguing. This whole, you know, it sounds like a pretty straightforward idea. You produce a report, you find out actually things are okay, but really you need to keep improving quality and demonstrating to stakeholders that this is important and that we've got a grip on it. But it's taken 4 years to get from 2016 to now. Can you kind of help us with, you know, where it went and why we ended up in the place we've ended up?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I mean, maybe somebody else can help me and tell me how many ministers we've had in that time, which is genuinely part of the answer. But I think, you know, we have had at least one minister during that period who had very little interest in this agenda. We've had one minister who had 2 terms who was, I would argue, probably more interested in the metrics side of it. And we've had one minister who had 2 terms who I think was very much committed to this agenda and not least saw it as an important tool for him in the broad context of the 2.4% GDP target. And so I think there's an element of that going through. I think the work, well, I guess what are the transitions have we've been through? We clearly went through a transition at one point where we made the decision that it should be more sector-led than Research England-led, and therefore there was that switch from the Research England team, who are still very, very much involved and need to take a huge amount of the credit for getting us where we are, but that transition into UUK and how they were going to handle that, and those of you who know UUK know that actually they're relatively poorly resourced in terms of taking on projects like this. So there was certainly a period during last year where there was some discussions around how Research England could give some financial support to UUK to put this in place, and that has now happened. UUK are getting funding from Research England to support the sort of the operationalisation, if that's a word, of this project. So that was one part of it. I think the other side of it genuinely was the overall context that we've been finding ourselves in. You know, Brexit was a distraction in different times. There were conversations in Research England, I think, that we're moving around inevitably around, you know, when are we going to have spending reviews? Will HIFE survive? How does this relate to HIFE at different times? You know, so we felt that at various times we were waiting for announcements of spending reviews in order to see how this would carry on. We thought we were getting to a place of being settled a little bit like that then last autumn, because I think fundamentally, obviously we went out for consultation last summer, got a lot of useful feedback. I think if we'd really put our foot down hard, we probably could have released it in certainly October last year, possibly September, after we'd done the consultation. But then we were starting to get into election times, and then we get into everything else that's gone on since then. We certainly, by Christmas, had an idea of what we wanted to do to bring it into life in terms of publishing it probably in January or February. And again, you'll have seen some of these discussions around having a development year, because we got feedback from the sector that it shouldn't clash too much with ref preparation, because many people on this call will be involved in both of those things. So the idea of a year, which would effectively be this year until early spring, of a first shot, which would be private, not published, but would get some feedback from a panel led, we now know, by Phil Clare, and then go through the cycle once, where there was less pressure because it wouldn't be public, but it would keep a bit of the momentum going and actually get us into a place next spring where we could do something a bit more public and a bit more substantive. Clearly, as I say, then virus, Brexit, deadlines has influenced all of that. We were then set up, I think, for literally the last week in March, maybe the middle of March. I think we had a date for release, and then decided again the sector was going through so much that wouldn't be a good idea. But I then pushed hard that actually, even though we weren't going to implement a process around it, that, you know, it was sitting there, it was ready to go, and that a feeling that actually we needed to get it into the public domain, get it published, even if then the announcements will come later in the year around what we'll actually do with that in terms of process. And I think we'll come to the end of this hour a little bit about what the role of the Concordat, or what influence it might have over the next few months as we respond to the virus and various other things. Yeah,
I think that's going to be an important topic. So just on the time frame, there isn't a time frame at the moment set for actually doing the process. But your best guess is, you know, in autumn, is it?
Yeah, I think if we do that sequence, I think, yeah, if things go well, I mean, who knows? We might be in the middle of another 3-month lockdown in the autumn, you know, and we'll all be worrying about other things. But assuming things sort of keep trundling along a little bit, then the announcements we were going to make at the beginning of this year, early autumn, whether we go through a full development year with the same cycle and things, I think that sort of discussion's yet to be had. And I suspect, again, will be as much influenced by what Research England think about the sort of synchrony between the KEF, the Concordat, and then you approach the HIFE funding, which obviously they're committed, as we all know, to evaluating how they're going to do HIFE allocations in the future and what the governance should be around that. Then we'll aim to keep on talking around that and bring them into some sort of coincidence over the next year.
Yeah, okay. And you mentioned briefly the independent panel, which has one mention in the Concordat at the very last sentence. Says that views will be, the institution will put in action plans to be looked at by the independent panel. Is there any thought yet about how that will work?
Well, Phil's already admitted he's on the line. He's probably the person to ask in another session around that. I think he's the only named member at the moment, and again, so this is my personal view. So this might not be how it works, but I was involved in the assessment panels for the HR Excellence Award for the early career researchers and linked to that. And that was light touch. You'll all know what the submissions were. There was a panel where there were a couple of people allocated to look at the submission, to provide some feedback. There was a bit of iteration with the sort of expert members of the panel, who then came together to take an overall view of the level of engagement. Not to score it in any way, it was effectively a binary process, but by the time it got to the point of adopting that badge of the HR Excellence Award, there'd been quite a lot of toing and froing between a small group of people and the university, and that's what's in my mind. Whether it actually will work exactly like that, I don't know, and Phil might already have been developing his view on how best to work it, but for me that would work as something that again would move us forward without creating anything that is seen to be hugely bureaucratic and hugely time consuming.
Do you know anything about how the panel will be appointed? What the process will be for making appointments? Will it just be Phil deciding who he wants on it?
Yeah. So if you want to be on it or you don't want to be on it, then that can affect your attitude as to whether you buy Phil a drink the next time you see him.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Trevor. I'd like to move to Mark now, because you've been involved in this probably longer than anyone. Certainly, the drafting of the first steps of the Concordat, you and I got heavily involved in that early on, and now you know that there's a panel involved, and you've got to do it. Something might be happening in the autumn, or it'll move along in a coordinated way, with all trying to connect up all the bits. I presume it's already in the bag at Keele. You've got all this all sorted, and it's all under control, is it?
I am probably the most unrepresentative director in that respect, in that Trevor and I have been at Keele together for my 5 years, but have actually worked together in different roles for, I was trying to work it out, but I've got a feeling it's 20 years now, is it? I can't remember.
Yeah, must be about that.
But, and there's a reason for that, in that we see things probably quite similarly in this area, irrespective of the institution. So I've got to admit that from that perspective, I don't perhaps have the dynamics in place that many of you will have. There's a natural understanding at Keele about our feeling. I have to say, on occasion, Trevor and I have come back from various meetings, Praxis meetings, and said, "Oh my God, everybody's doing an awful lot of work around this. Do we need to do more? We're so sort of weirdly close to it. Are we blinded in plain sight?" But I think more seriously is, and the sort of view I would give of encouragement to people is that, I do feel that the Concordat has done an excellent job in being able to allow everybody to respond for the institution that they are. You know, I tend to run life by a series of aphorisms, and one is a Judy Garland one, which is you should be a first-rate version of yourself, not a second-rate version of somebody else. And I think that's the first part of the KEF, that it says, you know, set out your stall in terms of what it is you think you're setting out to achieve, and then, you know, look across to the metrics and see whether that supports it. And I feel very comfortable that we will be able to respond in that way. You know, as I'm sure everybody's had a go at trying to run a mock KEF in terms of their metrics, and has got a sense about whether what they believe to be the case is tipping up in the metrics. And we have done that, and I think that is the case for Keele. We've got our little draft spider diagram that we've looked at, and we look at that and go, yeah, that's what we expect it to be. We expect it to be, you know, well out ahead there, and we don't expect it to have the footprint there that other institutions would have. So I'm quite relaxed. You know, when the day of reckoning comes, Vice Chancellor might tell me that wasn't the right approach. But so we don't talk about preparing for KEF perhaps in the same way as we talk about preparing for REF, because I just think we've got, because of the unique circumstances, there's an ease with which we're going to approach this. So, rightly or wrongly, on the job of Director of Research and Innovation, I'm quite relaxed in terms of KEF. Don't ask me about COO roles at the moment, but that's something else.
I'll talk to you about closing campuses and opening up all the residences. So you've been thinking about it for a while. Do you have any thoughts for other directors about how you, what's the starting point? What should be the starting point of this process for them? Obviously, they've got the framework there, and you know, there's a deadline coming, but we're not quite sure when. What should they be doing at the moment to get people in the right frame of mind for this?
It's the second aphorism is, you know, the Chinese proverb about when's a good time to plant a tree, sort of 50 years ago and today. And again, I think that really is the point for me. Don't chase the metrics, you know, and again, I apply that across all our areas of endeavour at Keele. You know, it's not about chasing TEF, REF and KEF. It's about actually excelling at those missions, and then the metrics will follow them. And I'm hesitant in any area at Keele that we actually put sort of metric chasing at the front. And we should have a confidence that if you are committed to excellence and committed to a strategic plan, then that's what you should be chasing. So I think, you know, and I think that's what the KEF and the Concordat's there to do, is to allow an institution to have a strategic conversation about what kind of contribution it feels it should make because of its own circumstances and that of its locality, and commit to pursuing them. So that would be the advice. The problem is that's, you know, rather late in the day advised, but I still believe that that's right. If you've not done that and you feel, you know, that you're still trying to chase a second-rate version of somebody else, then stop doing that and focus, have that strategic conversation about what it is you want to be, and write that down in your Concordat and pursue that, because that's the whole point of it, about self-assessment and establishing where you want to go. And I think, you know, certainly at Keele, we were probably 5-6 years ago in a position that we were sort of trying to chase everything, and you arrived and we were pretty average at most things. But we weren't actually excelling in anything. We weren't putting our chips in a particular place, and I think we changed that. And certainly for us, our local circumstances was much more around, you know, the local mission and what we could do in our particular economic circumstances in North Staffordshire. I'm not sure whether that's an easy answer for people who are sort of grappling more with filling in bits of paper that are going to arrive for us to fill in. But I think starting now is a good time to actually have that strategic conversation and to use it in your institution to say that actually there is now an opportunity to have that conversation and to perhaps exercise some of the ghosts that sit around at these unresolved issues that many institutions have, you know, the classic one of, are we protecting IP to make money or to have a social impact? And they often sit there unresolved in strategic conversations around senior executives and governing bodies, and, you know, use the KEF to say it's okay to be you, kind of thing. That's the whole point. And then the aim is to actually put in place good levels of performance that you want to achieve in those particular areas. I'm not sure if that's a useful answer for colleagues, but
well, it sounds like a great answer if you've got a vice chancellor that understands this world and a council that recognises that you perhaps have to focus on some things that you can be good at and become the best Judy Garland you can be. But isn't it likely that everyone will say that their processes, their approaches are perfect? Is there an incentive to truthfulness in all of this, do you think? Because I'm going to be putting in a document into my council which will tell them that we're not really focusing in these areas, and actually we could do a bit better in this area than we're doing at the moment. And isn't their response going to be, well, why haven't you sorted that out already? Why aren't we already, you know, best in the world at these things that we don't even do? So what do you, from your perspective, how would you tackle that as?
Well, I think we've had to tackle it, because I think, you know, when you ask the question around, you know, are all, you know, is the council with us? You know, my answer to that question would be, and I think it is the same across most councils, you know, they're from the external world. So actually this agenda is quite interesting to many councils, for good and for bad. Everybody's perhaps expert in this area because they can relate it particularly to their own sort of professional lives that they bring into those council chambers. But that's not been a wholly easy ride for us, because I think that, you know, we've got a council around about 25 people, and the lay membership come from very different walks of life, and they all have very different prejudices around what they think a university should be doing in this space. So I've had venture capitalists who can't understand why, as the commercial director, I'm not trying to flog every asset we've got, intellectual or otherwise. And then on the other side of that, people who run large-scale voluntary organisations for some of the poorest people in the country, who think that that's a completely alien concept, and why we, you know, it's all about civic good and civic impact. And we've had to have those debates. And, you know, the way I've tackled it, you know, particularly the early one around things like where we were placing emphasis on IP commercialisation, was just an evidence-based argument into it. You know, we were able to make it, you know, and the one on IP was a bit of a cakewalk, and actually helped by Trevor's report and previous reports. Actually, previous Vice Chancellor, we both worked for Paul Wellings, and reports before that, you know, and use an evidence base, and, you know, hope that you've got the respect for the council. And I did have, and I think they were prepared to support that vision. But I don't underestimate, if you can't do that, then you live in these slightly more tense worlds, and they come back to visit us every so often. A council member will forget we've had that conversation and go back to not quite understanding why it's not all about commercialising all the assets and making money out of the estate in various ways. But you know, certainly that would be the guidance I'd give to anybody. You've got to try, and particularly those who've got the leadership position at a senior table, that's your job. You know, you've got to be able to try and put that argument forward. At some point, somebody's vested trust in you and appointing you, and you know, you've got to give them confidence in that by guiding them through using evidence about why this works for this particular institution, and get people away from, but we need to be more like Exeter because Exeter do that, and we'd like to look more Exeter, and sort of say, no, that's not really how we should approach it, because we'll always fail to be Exeter, because Exeter's quite good at being Exeter.
Yeah, but I hear that often people need to be more Exeter. Probably.
Sean, could I just come in for a second on that one? Because I think the other side, which for me is getting council excited about other things. So, you know, one of the constructs that Mark's developed for us over the last 4 or so years is this whole idea of a suite of Keele deals. So we started one which was based on the economy. It was about working with local business and enhancing the economy of the region and thinking about all of those sort of slightly more commercial things. But actually we followed that up with a Keele deal health, a Keele deal, I've forgotten what, sustainability, and then most recently a Keele deal social inclusion. And actually, you know, council members can latch on to those sorts of things and really use that as the framework for them to recognise that all of these things are important. And I guess we have the other advantage at one level at Keele that we are small, and so there is a big realisation here that we genuinely can't do everything. That we have got to think about what we either are good at or want to be good at, and push on from there. So there is something around a sort of a distraction tactic, I think, with council around some of these things, that you can actually emphasise the things that you're important, while not ignoring all of the rest. We've got to have the absolute transparency there, but hopefully you can get them excited about other things.
Yeah. Oh, I've written down distraction tactic for council. That's we need to think of something. We could perhaps think of a major pandemic which would deal with it. And I'm going to come back to that in just 1 second, because there are a number of questions that will come up on the chat line about you know, the current situation. But just there was a question from Shona Camp. From somebody I can't recall.
Steph Maloney, sure.
Go too small. Steph Maloney, yes. Talking about the all the other concordats, and I suppose it's probably one for Mark. You're managing you know, a set of different groups of people in the university who each have been instructed to follow concordats. Each of them think that their concordat is a really important thing, and therefore gives them, you know, a special status in some way. How do you connect all those up, or how do you make sure they don't sort of cancel each other out or add value to each other?
Well, particularly like the early career researcher one of the advantages which many of us will have is that it sits under one organisational umbrella, and you know, because Keele's small, and I also have the COO role, there's an ability to have that wider oversight. So again, it's not something that we sit there at Keele and feel that there's you know, unfair asymmetry between the efforts that we're placing between the concordats. I suppose it's not concordat comparison, but the difference between TEFREF and KEF for us is that we aren't actually using it as a school-based performance measure. KEF, we're not having that conversation. We're not driving performance in that way, in where we would do that around TEF and KEF. So we are taking, you know, a different approach. There's a temptation to sort of just load them all in to the job jar and the metrics that we use to drive schools and faculties, but we're not doing that. We are taking a different approach, and you know, the early career concordat is the one that sits with one of my deputies, and you know, it's not been a major conflict for us. I don't know whether it has for other colleagues. You know, I'm a pretty laid back person, so I don't get too excited by the constant stream of more things to do, because
well, it may, I think there may be a benefit of you know, the compact size, which means that you can, you know, get a proper overview. You know, Andrew Ray has raised the question about, you know, where you've got faculties with their own approaches. They may well be dealing with the various concordats in their own way, and then you've got to try and bring some overarching sense into all of that, which is, yeah, I think, can be a challenge for some. But you know, that's part of what we've got to grapple with, isn't it? I think. Shall we move now to this question of where are we now? and particularly in relation to the whole pandemic. It feels to us as if, for the first time, perhaps, universities are being seen as a good thing. Or perhaps not for the first time, but certainly for the first time for a while, being seen as organizations that can help. They can help other people, not just helping themselves. And that's, there are so many examples of that, and some of them with knowledge exchange activities, but some of them simply people being helpful, being community minded and engaging and providing, just helping. In a sense, you could say, well, that's, therefore, do we need the Concordat? Because actually, universities are self-evidently a good thing. Trevor, do you think we're at that stage now, or do you think we still need the Concordat?
I think a week ago, I would have agreed more with the principle than I do now that you're putting forward, in the sense of, never has there, as you say, probably been a time when, as a sector, we've responded to a particular challenge that have been addressed in various ways. And as you say, that's literally from the lab through to the social side and students getting involved in communities and all of that. I am a little bit worried over the last 2 or 3 days that, having thought that the day of the expert might have re-emerged, that the experts are going to be increasingly seen as the scapegoats in the political landscape. And so I think we still can't take it for granted that universities will come out of all of this with the big gold stars that we all think that would be valid and deserved. So whether the Concordat is the right mechanism for making sure that continues or not, I don't. That's probably for other people to judge, shouldn't comment on, rather than me. One thing I would say, which I don't know whether I was just a bit slow or whether other people noticed the change last week, but the Ministerial Task Force on Sustainability of Research is now the Ministerial Task Force on the Sustainability of Research and Knowledge Exchange. And I'm not quite sure where that's come from. I'm actually in a webinar with the Minister this afternoon, and hopefully I'll get the chance to ask that question. But hopefully that is a recognition that actually this agenda is really important. Now, again, whether the Concordat is exactly what we need, or whether it's taken any notice of, or whether there's a process that will need to be a little bit different around it as we emerge a little bit more into the recovery period, I honestly don't know. I guess what I'm saying is that we can't take our foot off the pedal, and that's not just about doing more. It's seriously recognizing that it's not a foregone conclusion that we will get all the credit that we believe we deserve for doing what we do.
Yeah, and I think the ministerial group is beginning to realise what perhaps the people in government thought we already understood, was that bailouts around research have an expectation of benefit in some way. And that benefit is often driven through knowledge exchange into the economy or into society in various ways. Certainly I've been helping my Vice-Chancellor understand that dynamic, as he's one of the members. But I think it becomes much more obvious as they go along. Can we look at the other side of the coin? Tony Raven raised the question about everyone's just too busy at the moment. We're all dealing with this thing. Universities have done extraordinary things to keep their organisations going. We're all worried about finances and dealing with people who are in difficult situations. People haven't got time to deal with this. No. On top of it, is there a risk that we end up with a university councils, particularly, seeing this as one of 50 items on the agenda and not really giving it the attention it deserves?
I think there is that risk, but I think you've just answered it to some extent. You know, that actually, you know, the sector asked for £2 billion primarily research money, and government have turned around and said, no, you're not going to get that without getting something back in return. So, you know, I think, again, that's part of the, you know, the education of councils and things that hopefully will emerge from all of this. Now, clearly, we all hope that we get the research side as well. So we don't want to set knowledge exchange up in competition with research. That would be a really silly thing for the sector to do. But to recognise that those two things go hand in hand. But I think the other side of it is that the Concordat can do, I hope, which again comes from what you said, Sean, that actually, you know, it could have been a task force on research and technology transfer. And therefore we've got to make sure that we tell the story that actually it's not just about that direct, you know, getting stuff into the economy and getting that side boosting up, that actually there are going to be some huge societal issues to deal with over the next year or two, and that universities have a really important part to play in all of that. So, you know, if again the Concordat just helps us have the confidence that we can tell that story a bit better and actually push back a little bit on the fact that it's all around patenting stuff and selling it to the highest bidder, then for me, and obviously other people can disagree, that gives a reason for hanging on to the Concordat for at least a little bit longer as having a role.
So just thinking about the politics of that, because there's a view, you know, a pretty strong one, I think, which says, let's postpone this Concordat activity until everything's got back to normal, and then everyone will have time to think about it properly, because no one will deal with it properly at the moment. Mm-hmm. Your view seems to be actually we should press on with this, because demonstrating that we're doing this work well and that we're committed to doing it better is one of the triggers for bringing in more resources into the sector, which will make it easier for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's not an unreasonable approach. Not every Vice Chancellor might agree with me, but again, we'll go back to the conversation you had with Mark. If you present it to your leadership team and your council as, trying not to swear, bloomin' heck, you know, here's just another F to deal with, alongside TEF and REF, then actually, yes, they are going to say, bloomin', you know, how much money do you get? Well, you know, for you big universities, you're capped at £3 million in the context of £270 million deficit next year. That's going to be insignificant. Just ignore it and get on with other things. But if you frame it in terms of, you know, this is increasingly what's going to be expected of us. This is increasingly what the funding streams are going to recognise, and actually put money aside, which is obviously quite difficult. Actually, this is what universities should be doing, and whether you express it as a civic responsibility, civic duty, or just more broadly around the role of universities in the UK as we're currently set up, then I'd like to think, perhaps naively, that, you know, I have enough faith in human nature that councils would recognise that.
So Tom Hockaday, who's got a book apparently, and he's
must be a good book. He says he likes Trevor, so that's fine.
He's quoted the Concordat in his book. Apparently, it's available from all good booksellers. Actually, I'm looking for a review copy, Tom, because my bookshelf, you can see behind me, does not yet have KE for Dummies. So, if it was available, that's great. The question of the KEF metrics versus the Concordat, and in many ways, I think, particularly from what we've been saying, the Concordat might turn out to be more important than the metrics somehow. You know, should we just press on with the Concordat and call off the metrics?
Clearly not my call. And I don't want to second guess what the likes of Alice Frost would say. I don't even know if Alice is on this call or not today, but I think what Alice would say again is, for the last few years, and I think we can all imagine it's going to be even more so in the future as the economy gets tighter and tighter, that we are going to need to have as many tools in our armament as we can to demonstrate to, let's focus on Treasury, that actually we are worth investing in to carry out all of this activity. And and I agree with everything. The KEF metrics are never going to be ideal. I think Richard and Hamish have done a fantastic job in trying to provide a framework which is as uncontroversial as it is. I mean, it might feel controversial, but just imagine how bad it could have been. And I think also, though, giving us information, which again, if we as universities treat it appropriately, it's not a bad thing to have a standard set of data that allows us to compare, and then we can all judge ourselves what the idiosyncrasies are or the error bars are around some of those things. I also just honestly think that actually it is going to be there. I don't think it's down to the sector to say we don't want it. It's effectively now part of the government machinery. And that's how it's going to be.
I think you're right. Just on the question of value, I think we had some conversations with the Knowledge Exchange directors last week, and there was an interesting emerging discussion, which was about how universities have reacted to the crisis by making things available. So very good license terms for things, loans of equipment, providing things with really no obstruction or charge of any kind involved in it. And therefore, there may be an expectation that that's what we do. And there also may be, we therefore may need to think about value in other terms. If it's not simply about the finances, because that maybe isn't always appropriate, then maybe some other values need to be decided. And we did have a discussion with Alice and Hamish yesterday about that, and there may be some further thoughts that we can build on with the KEF data to try and understand the bigger value that there might be in some of these activities, not just about it's perhaps not even at all about the actual financial transaction at that moment, but the bigger value that's created by it. Yeah. So that's just sort of notice for everybody that things are happening there. A couple of questions, Mark Gray, on continuous improvement. Is that compatible with uncertainty? Because lots of things are not sure about, and I think the answer to that, you'd probably say, is the same as the answer to the previous question, which is we have to keep trying, and most things aren't certain.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we genuinely might be in a situation where what good looks like in 5 years' time is quite different from what good looks like now. One way or the other. If dare I say, if our economy really does crash, then actually the reality is that our standards might be lower in 5 years' time than they are now. That's a really pessimistic view, so I don't really hold for that. But I think the point is that continuous evaluation with the touch points into the process every couple of years, or whatever the interval is that we decide on. I think again remind you it's around. Oops, excuse me. Oh, sorry about that.
That's probably your next meeting starting, Trevor.
I think it is. Talking about social mobility, but yeah, I think again, it's the fact that the Concordat is built around that self-evaluation, which I think is critical, and apart from anything else, it will make us stop and think about where we're going rather than trundling on forward. And I think we're all in a situation where almost every aspect of our daily life, we're having to stop and think, is doing it the way we've always done it definitely going to be the way that we're going to do it in the future? And this is no different.
A brilliant place to end, Trevor. I'd just like to thank you, Trevor and Mark, for giving us time today, and thank everybody who's joined in. We had over 100 at the beginning. We're down to 77 now, so people are moving on to other things. I'd just like to say that the next Shed Talk will be on Wednesday the 3rd of June at 3 o'clock, when I'll be talking with Tony Soteriou, who's the new Director of Research Commercialisation at UKRI. We're talking about his plans to streamline all the UKRI's approaches to turning research into products and services. So I think that'll be a really interesting talk, and he's really keen to engage with the Knowledge Exchange community. So thank you very much to both our speakers. I wish you all a great couple of weeks. Till then, keep calm and KE on.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks, Sean.